afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for coming. I wonder how many of you are aware of the fact that Rock Creek Park is twice the size of Central Park in New York. I certainly was not aware of that until I began preparations for this program, nor was I aware that Rock Creek was the third national park established by Congress, preceded only by Yellowstone and Sequoia. Well, 2015 will mark the 125th anniversary of Rock Creek Park. And the Chevy Chase Historical Society is getting a head start on the celebration with our program today. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to mention a little bit about how the establishment of Rock Creek Park coincided with the development of Chevy Chase and how some of the prominent names in our local history were also very much involved in the creation of the park. The legislation establishing the park was passed by Congress in 1890. Just so happens 1890 is the same year that the Chevy Chase Land Company was incorporated. The creation of the park had a great significance for the land company and the new suburb that it was developing here in Chevy Chase. Senators Francis Newlands and William Stewart were the largest founding shareholders of the new land company. They saw the benefits that the park would have on the land company's holdings, and they became staunch supporters of the park in Congress. Now, while they undoubtedly appreciated the many natural splendors of the park, they were also keenly aware of the economic benefits that the park would have for their new business enterprise in Chevy Chase. They were aware that the park would create a natural boundary for Chevy Chase and raise the value of properties nearby. Senator Stewart candidly noted once that the establishment of the park would, quote, take 2,000 acres out of the market, thereby enhancing the value of the land company's properties here in Chevy Chase. Moreover, you will recall that the land company built the trolley line up and down Connecticut Avenue to carry potential homeowners from the city out to their new homes in the new suburb. Well, the establishment of Rock Creek Park, as well as the National Zoo, which was established by Congress just a year before Rock Creek Park, meant that the trolley would be used for recreational purposes by residents coming up from the town to the zoo and to the park. This new ridership ensured that the trolley would be successful during the years when the land company was building its new residential development at the end of the trolley line here in Chevy Chase. So, to help us learn more about the park, we're very fortunate to have two local authors, both of whom have just recently published rather different but equally interesting books about Rock Creek Park. Melanie Choukas-Bradley didn't have to come far to the Lawton Center today. She's a resident of the town and lives very nearby. She's a naturalist, writer, teacher. Her new book is titled A Year in Rock Creek Park, The Wild Wooded Heart of Washington, D.C. Over the course of a full year, Melanie visited the park several times a week, walking and skiing on its trails. She went at all times of day and in all different weather conditions. She observed and recorded even natural events in the park and compiled them in a beautiful book. Her book makes readers feel as if they're walking alongside her as she explores the park's many environmental treasures. Melanie is already well known as the author of City of Trees, the classic guide to the astonishing array of trees that we enjoy in the Washington area. This City of Trees has been continuously in print since 1981. She has also written 2 books on Sugarloaf Mountain, does a lot of speaking, lecturing, writing for various publications, and teaches courses for a number of organizations around town. Scott Einberger is the author of a book titled A History of Rock Creek Park, Wilderness and Washington, D.C. This is Scott's first book, and we congratulate him on this accomplishment. For almost 10 years, Scott served as an interpretive ranger with the U.S. National Park Service. He worked at 5 other national parks, primarily in the western United States, before coming to Rock Creek Park, where he served as a ranger for the past 4 years. He has recently taken a new position as the program director for the Dumbarton Oaks Park Conservancy. Scott's book actually came about in a very interesting way. During the federal government shutdown in October of 2013, Scott used his newfound free time to learn more about the environmental history of the Washington area. Though he had no intention of writing a book when he began his research, he soon became absorbed with the fascinating history of Rock Creek Park. He went on to produce a fascinating and informative full-scale book on the history of the park. So Scott will speak to us first and give us a little history of the park and context. Then Melanie will follow, and she will talk about the extraordinary natural treasures in the park. And then afterwards, they will both take questions. So please join me in welcoming Scott and Melanie.
Thank you. Thank you to the Chevy Chase Historical Society for having me here today. It's great to be with all of you folks. Also, as was alluded to, I always like to thank the federal government shutdown of 2013 because those 3.5 weeks last year helped me complete the first draft of the major research of this book. Oh, let me get back here real quick. It is working. Okay. I want to introduce the concept for the book and some of the reasons behind the book, and then I will touch upon 3 of the myriad stories from a history of Rock Creek Park wilderness in Washington, D.C. This is one of my favorite photos of Rock Creek Park. Now, it's important to make the distinction that I'm talking about Rock Creek Park, D.C. There's actually the larger Rock Creek Park, regional park in Maryland that goes all the way up to Lake Needwood and Rockville. But this is the D.C. the National Park Service administered Rock Creek Park in D.C. Although the other Rock Creek Park in Maryland could probably use its own history book as well. You can see, in this photo, you can see to your left, you can see the 16th Street linear corridor. Sorry about that. To your left, the green spot in the middle of the woods of Rock Creek Park is the Rock Creek Park Golf Course. Just above there, if you look closely, you can see the parking lot and tennis stadium, Carter and amphitheater area. Bottom line, though, I think when most people think about and utilize Rock Creek Park, we're focusing on the recreational components. If you go to Rock Creek Park on a weekend, you're likely to hike or take a bike ride on Beach Drive. I do it a lot. There's more to Rock Creek Park though than simple recreation. I argue, of course I'm biased because I worked for the Park Service for 7 years, but I believe that Rock Creek Park has the most diverse history of any unit of the National Park System. And primarily that's for 3 reasons. First off, the photo to the left is a photo of my favorite section of the park. It's the view just north of the Rapids Bridge Footbridge. And it's the 1 mile natural whitewater section of the creek. One of the main reasons Rock Creek Park has a diverse history is because of beautiful scenes like this. People for decades, if not centuries, have come to enjoy the respite and beautiful nature of the park. And history is technically the study of the written past, and a lot of people from John Burroughs, famous naturalist, to E.O. Wilson, to others, have written about their experiences in the park. If you look on the photo to the right, Rock Creek Park is, of course, in the middle of a city, and it's developed and grown along with a city. However, it's not just any city it's in the middle of, it's the city, the District of Columbia, the nation's capital. So it's an urban park, and in the national capital is another reason why it has a very unique history. Finally, Rock Creek Park, Rock Creek Park has a unique history, diverse history, because there's actually 2 Rock Creek Parks. 3 if you count the Maryland section, but in DC proper, there's the main 1,753 acre stem, the 1890 stem of Rock Creek Park that was established in 1890. which is generally this area, cut off, the top has been cut off. But as an administrative unit, as administrative unit of the National Park System, Rock Creek Park includes actually 3,100 acres, including 99 other units outside of the main stem, meaning the National Park employees of Rock Creek Park oversee 99 other satellite units, including Meridian Hill Park right here, several of the Civil War defenses of Washington sites like Fort Totten, Fort Stevens as well. So the book focuses on the two Rock Creek parks, if you will, the larger administrative unit as well as the main 1890 stem. Each of the sites have diverse history. So I want to briefly spotlight 3 stories from the book, and we'll do it in chronological order. I'll talk about the park's establishment story briefly, and then we'll go on to discuss the early development, specifically of roads and bridges in the park, and then we'll finally end with a couple of more famous visitors. The book itself is kind of 3-pronged. It's a recreational, developmental, and environmental history of the park. So these 2 characters, who are they? Charles Glover, that's good. And don't worry, I wouldn't have known these up until a few years ago. On your left is Charles Carroll Glover, who I would call the father of Rock Creek Park, actually. And then on your right is Nathaniel Mitchler of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Nathaniel Mitchler was the first person to officially propose a Rock Creek Park. This was in the mid-1860s, just a couple years after the Civil War. And we need to take ourselves back to the federal city, Washington, D.C., during that time to get into the story here. So if you look at the map, there's no such place as Chevy Chase, Maryland yet, right? There's the main part of the District of Columbia is actually combined farmland and forest. The only area that's highly inhabited is what we consider the downtown area and south of Florida Avenue. That was the boundary. Also Georgetown, which predates Washington, D.C. The Civil War increased the national capital's population by unprecedented numbers. And though that brought in a lot of new government workers and soldiers to defend the Union and protect the Union and take back the Union, that was probably a good thing, historically speaking. But the increase in population had its problems as well. In this photo, if you look in between the Capitol and the incomplete Washington Monument, you notice this was before they actually created East Potomac Park with the mud. But in this section, you can see Tiber Creek, which came to be a canal where urbanites threw their trash, as well as sewage. Raw sewage was in that creek. After storms and other things, the mud flats would flood, and in the 1850s and 60s, Washington, D.C. had several polluted water associated disease outbreaks. At the same time, in the late 1850s, early 1860s was when New York City's Central Park was being established. And some people in the nation's capital wondered why this capital of a nation didn't have a park in comparison. In order to make sure the President of the United States did not get waterborne diseases, and also to help establish a public park, the U.S. Secretary of War asked Brigadier General Nathaniel Michler, who you see here again, to come up with, survey the District of Columbia and come up with a proposed area to have a White House and public park. Michler had established reputation for himself. He had helped officially demarcate the U.S.-Mexico border after the War of 1848, the Mexican-American War, and he had distinguished himself in several battles of the Civil War. However, he was very excited with what he was told to do, to create to find a new place for a White House and a White House and a public park. However, he decided, and this made all the difference, he decided to separate the two. In his report that he gave to Congress in early 1867, he mentioned absolutely nothing about a White House in the Rock Creek Valley, but everything about a public park. And Pamela Scott, who's the author of Capital Engineers, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Development of Washington, D.C., notes that Michler's report had the tone of a, quote, mid-19th century romantic soul and not the stuff of a usual engineer's report to Congress. This is what Michler had to say to Congress about a public park in Rock Creek Valley. The valley of the Rock Creek and its tributaries, the broad and piney branches, and the several minor rivulets with the adjoining hills overlooking these beautiful streams present the capital of the nation advantages not to be lightly disregarded in providing a park worthy of a great people. All the elements which constitute a public resort of the kind can be found in this wild and romantic tract of land. I've probably spent well over an hour just enjoying and looking at this map. We won't do it that long, but there's several fascinating things, I think, about this map that he created, Michler created in 1866-67. This is the south central section of Rock Creek Park. This is Broad Branch Road and the tributary Broad Branch itself, Rock Creek, and then imagine this, well, this was and is today Military Road. You can actually see this is just 2 or 3 years after the Civil War. Sorry about that, this is really two. Okay. You can actually see the forts still in place, the entirety of Fort Stevens, Fort DeRussy, which is in the main stem of Rock Creek Park, and then even the bullet-shaped fort and battery, Reno. But this was actually farmland. This was actually where the current Nature Center and Horse Center is right now, this open area. And Crystal Springs was actually the largest spring feeding into Rock Creek, and there was a miniature resort there at the time that was owned and operated by a distant relative of the Pierces, of Pierce Mill fame. I could go on for hours, but this was Michler's map, and he proposed 2 Rock Creek parks. He proposed a 2,500-acre park, which would have included actually all of the Outlier forts, and he also proposed a smaller 1,700-acre park should his larger park be too much to ask. Again, it would have protected much of the battlefield of the Battle of Fort Stevens. This picture of Fort Stevens there, 1864. Of course, we know that Michler's proposal did not pass Congress because the park was not established in 1867. He recommended establishing the park and paying for the park before realty and the city expanded and realty costs skyrocketed in the area, thus making it more expensive to buy back the land. His words went unheeded, and 25 years later when the park was established, we as the federal government did end up paying a lot more. The next The next main character and ultimate character to pick up the establishment of Rock Creek Park torch was Charles Carroll Glover, a man who was not born in the area. He was born in the Carolinas, but he spent a lot of time here in boarding school and spent a lot of time hiking and bopping around the Rock Creek Valley and fell in love with it. He became a affluent businessman in downtown Washington and also became a major philanthropist for DC. He actually paid $75,000 to start, for the startup of the National Cathedral. He also donated 80 acres of land that ultimately became Glover Archibald Park. Also, just east of the Anacostia River, near Fort DuPont Park, he donated land there as well that he had purchased. However, perhaps the most significant thing he did was help establish Rock Creek Park. How did he do that? Well, lots of ways. These are not photos of him, of course, but he helped. He was a lobbyist with his high. He was very wealthy, and that had a lot of influence, especially in Washington in the 1880s and 90s. And what he did was talk with dozens of members of Congress and the Senate and asked them and talked them into supporting the Rock Creek Park bill. He also created a citizens group that lobbied through newspapers and such for the park, and the group met at his house several times, including the initial meeting. He was the president of that group. Congressmen and politicians that didn't want Rock Creek Park primarily didn't believe the park should be established because they didn't want their distant constituents, say an Ohio congressman or a California congressman, they didn't think their San Francisco constituents should pay for what they deemed a city park. Rock Creek Park is not a city park, even though it doesn't have national in its official title. It is managed by the National Park Service, and it's one, since 1933, it's been one of over 400, well, it's now one of over 401 national park units. The ultimate compromise, I think, was actually kind of was very democratic. The compromise involved DC government paying for half the cost of the park, federal government paying for half the cost of the park, and people whose properties were very close to the park and stood to gain in value because of its establishment paid a larger share of the DC tax, if that makes sense. Because of that, Rock Creek Park was established in September of 1890, the very same day that Sequoia and General Grant, later named Kings Canyon, national parks were established. Just because a national park is established on paper, however, doesn't mean there's any roads or visitor centers or campgrounds or trails there. And in the early and mid-1890s, the Rock Creek Park Commission was set up to purchase back the park's property using eminent domain. A couple of hundred farmers and homesteaders, tenant farmers, were kicked off their land, not pleasant for them. You could argue that it was for the ultimate greater good, because millions of people, hundreds of millions of people have enjoyed the park ever since, but it was not pleasant for them. But after the land was purchased back, this is kind of a chronic theme in national park history. After parks are established, they receive minimal, sometimes even zero appropriations for the first several years. And the person in charge of the park at this time, in the mid to late 1890s and early first decade of the 1900s, was one Colonel Lansing Beach of the Army Corps of Engineers. And to do the best to develop Rock Creek Park so that people could enjoy it from the downtown area, he managed to get free labor in the form of chain gangs. Now, this is not a chain gang in Rock Creek Park, but it is a historical chain gang photo. However, it was chain gangs that essentially created most of the early roads in Rock Creek Park. Ridge Road, Military Road, not the one we see now, but an earlier 2-lane, not 4-lane road. Grant Road, parts of what was then known as Daniel Road, but now is Oregon Avenue, and even parts of Beach Drive and Ross Drive, many of the roads in the park. A lot of the roads in the park are very windy and narrow. We have to think, this was before the widespread use of the automobile. The roads in the park were designed for pleasure driving, not from cars, but for horse and buggy. These are some of the early roads in the park, the chain gangs under Beach's direction established. Lansing Beach is most famous for a specific roadway and bridge in the park. In the early 1900s, Rock Creek Drive was established, running from just north of Pierce Mill to Military Road, and this was the most difficult section of the road of the park to build in because it's the white water section of the creek. Melanie can probably tell you more, but very briefly, it's where the harder rock of the Piedmont Plateau meets the softer rock of the Atlantic Coastal Plain. And where that happens, you have the fall zone. That's where on the Potomac, it's Great Falls. In Rock Creek, it's this in Rock Creek Park, it's this mile section south of Military Road and north of Boulder Bridge. That was a difficulty for Beach to build the road in there, but he did. And if you notice today, engineers thereafter have done a very good job of keeping that section of Beach Drive a little bit narrower than the rest of the park roads. And to me, that gives you a much more natural, countryside, forested feel. I actually wish more roads in the park were like that. What bridge is this? Boulder Bridge, yeah, the most famous bridge in the park. Constructed between 1901 and 1902. Lansing Beach is given overall credit for the general design and location of the bridge. And as park lore has it, Beach called for the stones to be used on the side of the bridge. He called for those stones to be man-sized, which is an engineer's term then for stones that you could pick up easily with one hand or your hands. What the two stonemasons working on Boulder Bridge did was actually create man-sized stones, size of a person. When Beach came out the afternoon when they had started work, he saw the way they looked and actually liked it, so he said, that's fine. So that's why we have larger stones there today. Rock Creek Drive itself was to honor Lansing Beach before he moved on in his career. The name was changed of Rock Creek Drive to Beach Drive, Beach Driveway actually, and then it was shortened over time to Beach Drive. Because of Beach's work, early 1900s Washington Post letter to the editor proclaimed Beach as the, quote, guardian angel of Rock Creek Park. Very briefly here, I want to mention a third set of, one more story from the book real quickly, and this involves people who visited the park. If you build it, as the saying goes, they will come. And a lot of visitors did, perhaps no one more famous than Theodore Roosevelt. Both before and during he was president, he was in the park every Sunday. He had a tradition of horseback riding with his wife through the park every Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is coming up, so that's good timing. He picnicked every Sunday in the park and liked to go on point-to-point point-to-point walks in the park. And he said, he reminisced of Rock Creek Park, quote, "We liked Rock Creek Park because we could do much scrambling and climbing along the cliffs. We would arrange for a point-to-point walk, not turning aside for anything. For instance, swimming in Rock Creek if it came our way." One of the main characters, one of the main friends of Roosevelt that hiked with him was the French ambassador to the U.S. At the time, Jean-Jules Jusserand. There's a miniature memorial in Rock Creek Park. It's actually being restored right now, but dedicated to Jusserand. And Jusserand notes that on his first hike with the president, he noted how Jusserand was preparing just for kind of a cliche walk in the park on flat surface, but it was actually, his walk was more of a run, quote, "No slacking of speed, but a continuous race, careless of mud, thorns, and the rest." In Jusserand's autobiography, he notes of a comical incident he experienced with the president on that first walk. Again, Theodore Roosevelt, like point-to-point walks, and he would not, when he hit Rock Creek, he would simply take off all his clothes and go through it. So he did this on the first hike with Jusserand, and Jusserand was put in a very uncomfortable position. You know, as the French ambassador, does he follow the president's lead, or does he stay in his clothes? In his autobiography, Jusserand notes, "I too, for the honor of France, removed my apparel, everything except my lavender gloves. The president cast an inquiring look at this as if they too must come off, but I quickly forestalled any remark by saying, 'With your permission, Mr. President, I will keep these on, otherwise it would be embarrassing if we should meet ladies.'" Lots of famous visitors to the park, actually. Woodrow Wilson was a big user of the park and said that Rock Creek Park was the most beautiful place on earth. But those were just 3 short stories from the book. This is the Jusserand Memorial just alongside Beach Drive in the park, which Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his wife actually dedicated in 1936. The book itself has a lot of other stories in it, including stories discussing the establishment and construction of Fort Stevens by the Civilian Conservation Corps, Louis Armstrong at Carter Barrett Amphitheater, some of my favorites. Real quickly here, even the development and history of the Nature Center. This is one of my personal heroes, Secretary of the Interior Stuart Udall, and children in the Nature Center. Might have gone a little bit over, I'm sorry about that, but thank you very much. I'll be happy to.
Thank you, Scott. That was so fascinating. I could listen to you all day, and I have to say, I have read Scott's book cover to cover, and it is fabulous. There are so many great historical anecdotes in his book, and it's a real tour de force pulling together the history of Rock Creek Park. And I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to talk about more of the nature of Rock Creek Park. What I want to do, which is what I do in my book, is take you on a journey through the year. And my special part of Rock Creek Park that I visit all the time is the Boundary Bridge area. Are there people here who walk at Boundary Bridge? Yes, and I know some of you. Okay, and I hope I have good luck with this. Okay, here we go. So the photographs for the book were taken by Susan Austin Roth, who is a professional photographer and author of several gardening books. Her photos have been on the cover of Better Homes and Gardens and all sorts of national magazines. And this is her first kind of wild project that she did. This is the Western Ridge Trail, which is one of the 2 main hiking trails in Rock Creek Park. It goes down the western side of the creek. And Scott talked about how the park was created, and Mary about how the park was created in 1890. And when you create a park in 1890 and you leave the trees alone for 125 years, this is what you have. And I am constantly pinching myself when I'm in Rock Creek Park. I cannot believe that I'm in the middle of Washington, D.C. Here's a beautiful great blue heron, some mallard ducks. I often see wood ducks. I see all kinds of resident and migrating birds. I was just walking there this morning and heard and saw the winter bird flock. And there's a little toad during mating season coming into one of the vernal pools at Rock Creek. The hiking is really pretty challenging. There are two long trails that are each about 5 miles long. One goes down the western side, I mentioned that, the Western Ridge Trail. The Valley Trail goes down the eastern side, and you can hike all day, and you will run into other people who are out there hiking, which is a wonderful thing. But you can imagine that you're out in the mountains somewhere, just like Teddy Roosevelt did. Here are some people jogging. I believe Sophia is here, and that's her mommy jogging, Maria. I ran into her dad, Joe, today out jogging. I love to see people running in the park. There are a lot of very serious athletes who work out there. These two girls that are just about to run over Boundary Bridge, I believe, are training for their cross-country team. And then Rock Creek Park just invites you to sit and enjoy. These are a couple of people who are just having a picnic. I think they were doing some artwork. On the weekends, Beach Drive is taken over by the cyclists and people jogging and skateboarding and just having a wonderful time. And of course, a lot of people love to walk their doggies there. And the dogs are so very happy when they are in Rock Creek Park. Thank you. Well, thank you on behalf of Susan. And I just love to see families. I see what you mean about this, Scott. This is so sensitive, this clicker. To see families out enjoying the park. You can go on a weekday and almost have the trails to yourself, but on the weekends you'll find a lot of people. I love both. I love both the solitude, and I also love seeing other people out really having a great time, and especially seeing kids playing in the creek. This is the stretch that Scott was talking about that's on the fall line, just between Military Road and Rapids Bridge. This too is one of my favorite parts of Rock Creek. Beautiful rocks, wonderful white water. And the park is just a great place to contemplate the beauty of nature. Scott has talked a lot about the park in Washington, that it was created in 1890, the same year as Yosemite, and I think you said Sequoia as well. One of the nation's largest urban parks, twice the size of Central Park, as Mary noted, and historically a favorite haunt of presidents with over 2 million visitors each year. But in Maryland, there's another whole story to Rock Creek Park. Rock Creek is actually 33 miles long, and 22 of those miles are in Maryland. And in the 1930s, Montgomery County decided to protect stream valleys that were in under great threat of being overdeveloped and compromised. So Rock Creek, the main stem of Rock Creek, much of it is parkland, as well as the North Branch, which is one of the major tributaries. It's a really pretty vast watershed. There are 155 miles of tributaries in Montgomery County alone. And of course, it's part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Everything we do affects it. My husband, Jim, who's here in the front row, sitting there with Scott, he and I live right up the street on Oak Ridge Avenue, and we have a drain right next to our yard that goes into Copeland Run, which then flows into Rock Creek. So everything we do in our yard is, going right into the creek. So we're very mindful of that, and we don't use any chemicals in the yard. Mary asked me this week about something surprising that I was going to share, and I don't have anything as good as Teddy Roosevelt and the French ambassador in the creek. But the first thing that came to mind was canoeing under the Beltway. When I met the editor and publisher of Bethesda magazine in Rock Creek Park years ago. I've met many friends and colleagues in Rock Creek Park over the years. And he assigned a story to me. He saw me out with my clipboard. I was getting ready to lead a walk for the Audubon Naturalist Society, and he saw me looking at a tree with my clipboard and asked me what I was doing, and I told him. And we were chatting, and so he asked me if I would write a story, if I would follow Rock Creek from the district line to the source, way up in Laytonsville, Maryland, and write a story about it. And he said, travel any way you want, by bicycle, on foot, even by car, canoe it if you want. So I actually canoed under the Beltway. And I do want to just quickly read this passage from the book for you. I'm going to, oh, the stand is gone now. I didn't think about this. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. So my book is organized, thank you very much. It's organized through a year. It starts on New Year's Day and goes through a year. And this is an entry on November 27th. It's called North by Northwest from Boundary Bridge. And the friend that I'm describing in this entry who went canoeing with me was one of the founders of Friends of Rock Creek's Environment, which is now the Rock Creek Conservancy. My friend Steve Dryden and I dip our canoe paddles deep in silt. We are trying to paddle up Rock Creek north of Boundary Bridge as part of my research for the article I'm writing about Rock Creek. The Mormon temple with its white facade and gold needle-sharp steeples glows on the horizon. Rock Creek is a dark mirror reflecting the now leafless branches overhead. Up ahead, the Beltway looms. Our difficult silt paddling pays off, and we enjoy a few moments of clear sailing while our paddles dip only water until we reach the next rocky stretch, where we drag the heavy canoe up the viney bank and portage through the mugwort and stilt grass to the Beltway's underpass. This must be a first, I say to Steve, as we gingerly climb down a rock wall to put in directly under the multi-laned Beltway. The constant hum of traffic above us and a loud trip-trapping that sounds like a frightening contemporary version of Billy Goat's gruff disturbs the peace and prevents further conversation. But once our canoe is in the water again, we enter a strange land of enchantment, even as the Beltway continues to hum over our left shoulders. Trash hangs from the trees like plastic Spanish moss, marking the last high water mark. Beer and soda cans are strewn across the beaches, and submerged tires seem almost strategically placed in the creek's bottom, providing extra leverage for our silt paddling. A flock of wood ducks swims upstream, fleeing away from us, and I concentrate on watching them instead of listening to the traffic. Bottomland trees lean over Rock Creek in all their late autumn semi-naked beauty. Bone-white sycamores still hold a few rusty leaves. Box elders show off their wheat-colored chains of samaras. Ironwoods are dressed in elephant gray bark, and river birches add to the display with their peeling cinnamon-colored bark. Leaves from the red and silver maples float downstream, twirling in the current. Amidst the Dr. Pepper cans, raccoon prints are stamped into the muddy shore, and a mother deer and her fawn climb down the bank and stand in the creek drinking. From my place in the bow, I'm amazed by the contrast of wild beauty and degradation. Just as the trees seem most enchanting in the gathering twilight, the large green Connecticut Avenue sign next to the Beltway springs into ghostly view above us, its arrows pointing to Kensington and Chevy Chase. I feel like I'm viewing my daytime reality from the deep, dark realm of dreams. So these are some of the places further up the creek in Maryland. Have any of you been to the Agricultural History Farm Park? That's a wonderful place to visit. And it's where the economic offices for Montgomery County's agricultural services are. Up in the right-hand corner is a baptismal pool. This is just north of South Lawn Lane, which is north of Rockville. And until the 1950s, Mount Calvary Baptist Church had full immersion baptisms there. And you can still feel the serenity of the place. And then Lake Needwood is down to the right. And then this is up near the source. the picture down below. Whoops. So these are places in in the DC part of the park. Pierce Mill, which Scott mentioned. I'm not even going to try to use the pointer. I'm having so much trouble with making the slides go forward. Pierce Mill has been renovated recently, and they actually have the mill wheel going. There are times when you can go and see them actually grinding corn again. There's a nature center, and then the two trails I mentioned, the Western Ridge Trail up on the right and the Valley Trail down here. And then this is Pulpit Rock in the lower corner. That was one of Teddy Roosevelt's favorite places to go rock scrambling. I'm actually leading a walk there for the Audubon Naturalist Society on December 6th. And this is my part of the park. I think we all have our, those of us who love Rock Creek Park feel kind of possessive about our own parts of the park, and this is mine. Does anyone recognize this little footbridge? This is Boundary Bridge. And I learned from Scott's book, it was built during the New Deal. I think it was the Public Works Administration that built the footbridges in Rock Creek Park. And there's a sign on the side of the bridge that is 1935. So this coming year is going to be the 125th anniversary of the park. It's also the 80th birthday of Boundary Bridge. And it's a little footbridge. It's called Boundary Bridge. It's right at the District Maryland line. And it's where they close the road, they close Beach Drive off on weekends. So you can park there. There's a little parking lot. It gets awfully full, but you can park along the road. And then there's a wonderful loop trail that a lot of us here in this room follow that goes along the creek and then up the Valley Trail and then across another footbridge called Riley Spring Bridge. And then you return on the Western Ridge Trail, and it's just a wonderful trail. It takes you along the bottomlands where you see lots of the trees that grow along the creek and then into the upland woods. It's beautiful in winter. I'm from Vermont, and Jim and I lived in the White Mountains of New Hampshire before we moved here, so we're huge fans of snow, and Susan is as well. The creek is just beautiful in the winter. One of my favorite winter sights is the tulip trees against the sky. Has anyone noticed, I'll try this pointer, that these winged seeds, they're called samaras, when they're like in a little cup-shaped formation, and when the sun shines on them, they're like golden candelabras. Has anyone noticed that in the winter in Rock Creek Park? Here they are. Here they are, close up. And then when it snows, they fill up with snow. It's almost like ice cream cones. And then they're a really important food source for cardinals and other birds and mammals. And every time there's a snow, you have a whole new layer of them on the snow. When you go there now, you'll just see these winged seeds called samaras everywhere on the trail. And the American elm is beautiful in the winter. These are the buds that my friend Chris Fleming, who lives over in Martin's Additions and is my longtime botany teacher, says that these buds remind her of rick-rack on a girl's old-fashioned dress. There are a lot of American elms in the park, which is good news because, we've had terrible times with Dutch elm disease. This is a pawpaw twig. And it's often called Audubon's paintbrush because you can see how the terminal bud looks like a little paintbrush. And I don't think we know whether Audubon actually painted with it or not, but it is often called Audubon's paintbrush. This is an ironwood, musclewood, or hornbeam tree. These grow all along the creek. And I lead walks for Audubon 4 times a year. The series is called A Year at Boundary Bridge, and I've been doing it since 2007, and it's recounted, these walks are recounted in my book. And what I love is that you walk along the creek, and you're in a floodplain with bottomland trees, so you see a lot of ironwoods, river birches, sycamores, trees that you expect to find there along the bottomland, and then when you go into the upland woods, you see a whole different community of trees. This is a sycamore on the right. They are so beautiful in the wintertime when they've lost their leaves. When you drive into Rock Creek Park, they just kind of knock your socks off. And this is a little kingfisher. Susan and I actually dedicated our book to the tulip trees and kingfishers of Rock Creek Park. And the kingfisher, does anyone know the kingfishers of Rock Creek? They are the most purposeful birds. They fly up and down the creek, and they have this loud kind of scolding, chattering sound that they make as they're flying past. And when you hear that chatter, you just need to stop whatever you're doing to pay attention so you can see them coming by. And then every now and then you'll see them dive into the creek and catch a fish. This is Jimsonweed, and this is quite a notorious plant. It's in the family, it's the tomato family, but it's also the deadly nightshade family. It has, this plant family has tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, potatoes in it, but also belladonna and Jimsonweed. And these prickly capsules remain in the winter. There's a little beach just south of Boundary Bridge right now where you see all these prickly capsules with these black seeds inside, and they're actually hallucinogenic. During Bacon's Rebellion in the 1600s, some British soldiers got punch drunk after ingesting this. And Jim and I, just this past week, we were watching Endeavour, which is a British PBS series about the young Inspector Morse, and there was a case in which Datura stramonium was the poison that killed somebody. Anybody recognize these? Skunk cabbage. I'm a huge fan of skunk cabbage. It blooms in the winter, and this hooded spathe, it kind of looks like meat, and it sort of smells like rotting meat, and then the plant attracts insects that are attracted to carrion to pollinate it, and the true flowers are here on the spadix inside. Also, this is a rare plant that can generate its own heat, so you will see it actually breaking through the snow. One of my favorite sights in the winter is the American beach. It's got this beautiful, smooth, silvery, almost like sterling silver bark, and these beautiful marcescent leaves. These are leaves that stay on the tree all through the winter. And here are the little prickly fruit capsules. I learned a wonderful word that I write about in the book from Gail Griffin, who's the director of Gardens and Grounds at Dumbarton Oaks, and the word is marcescent. Does anyone know this word? It means withering but not falling off. And some of the trees hold on to their leaves in the winter, and they have marcescent leaves. And I just think it's a really poetic word. Okay, so this is spring in Rock Creek Park. And for those who are not fans of winter like I am, you'll probably be happy to see a spring picture. There's a little redbud. This is looking south from Riley Spring Bridge. And this is one of my favorite pictures of Susan's. She actually had another version of it that was on the cover of the most recent edition of my book, City of Trees. She took this picture from the Taft Bridge on Connecticut Avenue. That's the big lion bridge that goes from Calvert Street to Colorama. And you look down, next time you're there, you really have to walk across the bridge to get the full, to really fully appreciate it. But you look down on Rock Creek Park from there, and it's just a gorgeous view. This is one of my favorite plants. People on my field trips always kid me about all the favorites that I have. But this is one of my favorites, and it's the spice bush. And one of the cool things about woody plants, which includes trees and shrubs, is that they create their buds the year before. So these are the flower buds of the spice bush, which you will see if you walk in Rock Creek Park. You'll see them on the shrubs now, and they stay on the shrub all the way from the previous summer until early the next spring when they burst into these beautiful yellow flowers. This is a shrub that deer don't eat, and an overpopulation of deer is one of the ecological challenges in Rock Creek Park, but they don't like spicy things, so the spice bush is done really well. They also don't like the pawpaw. This is a pawpaw flower. because if you bruise a leaf during the year, when the leaves are out, you'll see it kind of smells like gasoline or kerosene. One of the things I love about spring in Rock Creek Park is that the leaves, before the chlorophyll really gets cooking in the leaves, you see a lot of the pigments that are similar to the autumn colors that you see. So this is a spring picture, but it actually looks like autumn foliage. And I have a whole entry about how leaves first unfold. And the tulip tree, this is the tulip tree, which I showed you in winter and when I was talking about the candelabras against the sky. Everything on this tree is tulip shaped. The leaf, you can see how the leaf is kind of like a child's drawing, outline of a tulip. The flower is very tulip-like. It's in the magnolia family, and you can see that when you see it in bloom. And I talk about how the leaves reach for the sky, almost like baby's hands. Whereas the beech buds, these are the elegant buds of the American beech, and there you can see the smooth gray bark. They're starting to spill out, and then they hang downward, and I describe those as being like dancer's skirts. Eventually, all the leaves end up horizontal, but it's just really fascinating how they start out in different directions. And the oak leaves are just so enchanting when they first unfurl. The white oak with its pretty little rounded lobes, the northern red oak with its sharp lobes. This is a willow oak. When those little leaves first come out, they look almost like spruce needles. This is a chestnut oak. This grows in the dry, rocky uplands of Rock Creek Park. And here's a hop hornbeam tree. And this is the Riley Spring Footbridge, which is another one of the New Deal bridges from the 30s. And see the bark on this tree? We like to say it looks like a cat scratched it. During mating season, the toads just take over. And I have a whole entry in the book called Toad Hall about how crazy they get during mating season. Now we hear them, if you live in the town here, you hear them in the neighborhood in the early spring. Have you heard this like high trill? It sounds almost like an insect sound, but it's very, very early in the spring. Those are toads. And if any of your neighbors have any kind of water garden, they will come and mate in the water. These are skunk cabbage leaves. After the flowers die back, these beautiful leaves come up. This is actually one of our problematic invasives. It's the lesser celandine from England, which has kind of taken over the floodplain. Oh, I wanted to show these flowers because when you read Scott's book, you'll read about John Burroughs, who he mentioned, who's a famous naturalist who came to visit the park in the 1860s and then came back later with Teddy Roosevelt. And these were two of the flowers he saw there, the bloodroot and the spring beauty. And of course, our beautiful Virginia bluebells. Sorry, I didn't give you a chance to savor them. I'm trying to move along here because I think our time is, am I okay time-wise? Hurry up, yeah, okay. So this is these are mayapple plants. This is the flower of the mayapple, this is the fruit, and these are the leaves that are like little umbrellas. And we always think of, when we think of pharmaceuticals, we think of the rainforest as being a source of pharmaceuticals, but all of our native plants were used medicinally. And the ones that were most toxic were the ones that the American Indian tribes and then the early settlers learned from them how to use them in small doses, and they were the best medicines. So this is a plant that was used for to treat jaundice and hepatitis and syphilis. And today it's been studied and it's being used as an anti-cancer drug. And I actually know someone who had no luck, he had lymphoma and he had no luck with traditional chemotherapy, and he's on a drug derived from the mayapple plant. Here's the jack in the pulpit related to the skunk cabbage. And this is our beautiful native azalea, the pinkster azalea. And here it is growing at Laurel Ledge. This is, I call this ledge Laurel Ledge because mountain laurel also grows here, and it's also part of the geologic laurel formation. My neighbor, has anyone seen the mountain laurel when it's at this stage? One of my neighbors, Esther Schrader, who some of you probably know, we were walking when the mountain laurel was in bud, and she said they look like little mini meringues, these buds. And here they are fully out. And here's an Indian cucumber root, which is another beautiful plant. There's our great blue heron again. And summer in the park is just spectacular. I mentioned the canopy before, and really, I led a walk in June for the Audubon Naturalist Society, and we went out onto a beach, we were on a sunny beach, and we came back into the forest from there, and it felt like, it was a hot summer day in June, it felt like we were walking into an air-conditioned room. So if you ever wonder about the importance of canopy trees and what they do to cool and clean the air, just walk into Rock Creek Park in the middle of the summertime. These are black walnuts. And I love the fruit. One of the things we always do on our June walk is we look at all these little fruits that are green in the summertime, and you have to look really closely to see them because they're the same color as the leaves. Here's a monkey flower, jewelweed or touch-me-not. And a lot of the late summer and early fall flowers are in the aster or daisy family, like this Jerusalem artichoke. Here's Boulder Bridge with the man-sized rocks. That was so much fun seeing the old car in the picture. And here, one of my favorite things is just to watch the leaves falling from the trees and falling into the creek and then watching their journey down the creek. Whoops, that's one of my favorite pictures of Susan's. Tulip tree in the fall. And this year we had really nice autumn color, and the oak trees really put on a show, as they did when she took this picture as well. Sassafras. Acorns, we had a really good acorn year this year. And it's fun to study acorns and see all the different types of acorn caps and compare them and learn to ID the trees from the acorns alone. Hickories, we have 3 species of hickory that are common in the park: the mockernut, the bitternut, and the pignut. Fall fruits, you can still see some of these now, even though the leaves are down. And this witch hazel is blooming now. And I walked in the park this morning, and it's in full, beautiful bloom. And this is, of course, the source of the astringent witch hazel that you can purchase in the drugstore. I mentioned how the buds form the year before, and it's just so delightful. Like, these are the flowering dogwood buds. They're shaped like little onions, or I think they're even shaped like Eastern Orthodox church spires, you know, those wide spires. I do want to just quickly mention that Rock Creek Park is a wonderful place, but it has a lot of challenges. Development pressures, you know, there's a lot of problem with stormwater runoff, which comes off all the impervious surfaces and then overwhelms the creek. And the county and the state and DC are doing things to mitigate that, but that is one of the biggest problems because it brings an overload of sediments into the creek and also toxins. Strong storms and droughts. I have a lot about climate change in my book. We had 2 pretty bad droughts the year that I kept a record. Invasive plants are a problem, and deer browsing. But there's a lot you can do to get involved to help out the park. You know, there are Weed Warrior and Master Naturalist programs, stream cleanups, stream and woodland cleanups. Carol Bergman is a good friend of mine. She's the Montgomery County botanist and ecologist who's in charge of the parks in Montgomery County. She has a wonderful Weed Warrior program that you can get involved with. She's actually the person who coined the term Weed Warrior. The Rock Creek Conservancy is doing a lot to protect the park, and with the 125th anniversary coming up, they're really gearing up for that. It's a great opportunity to let people know about this wonderful resource and all of its needs. There's the National Park Service and the Audubon Naturalist Society. I can't say enough good things about them in terms of teaching people about nature, getting people out in nature to appreciate it, and working on conservation issues. There's a lot you can do in your own yard too. Whenever you can plant a big canopy tree like an oak or a maple, that's wonderful. But if you don't have space for it, there are these small trees that are all native to Rock Creek Park that do really well in cultivation. Here's some of our bridges. And I have my books, the soft cover and then the limited edition. And I just want to thank you all so much and leave you with this thought. Enjoying natural beauty is your birthright, our birthright.